again to the Medical Terminology Podcast. This episode is Chapter 6, Part 2, Immune System Anatomy. The immune system protects the body from harmful substances. And there are 4 types of harmful substances that are mentioned in the textbook. The pathogens, which are disease-causing organisms. Allergens, which are substances that produce allergic reactions. Toxins, which are poisonous or harmful substances. And malignant cells. These are life-threatening cancer cells. Rather than being a single body system, the immune system depends on structures from several other body systems. First of all, the immune system depends on all of the lymphatic tissues except for the lacteals, and I'm going to review those with you now. First, there are the lymphatic vessels. Then there are the lymph nodes, and if you remember, the lymph nodes filter and destroy pathogens that are in the lymph. There are the tonsils. Tonsils form a protective ring against invaders. There's the thymus, which is a gland that secretes a hormone called thymosin, and this hormone differentiates lymphocytes into T cells. We're going to talk more about that later. There's the spleen, which contains lymphocytes, and it's also involved in what's called B cell activation. And there's the Peyer's patches, which contain lymphocytes involved in B cell activation. And finally, we have the vermiform appendix, and again, it's not exactly clear what it does, but it's thought that it has some immune function. Now, in addition to these lymphatic tissues, there are 2 other tissues that are very important in the immune system. First of all, there's the skin, because the skin provides a physical barrier against any invading organisms. And secondly, there's the bone marrow. The bone marrow creates special cells called lymphocytes. Okay, now let's do a little review of what we just talked about. What is the term for a disease-causing organism? That's a pathogen. Pathogen. What is the first line of defense that protects the body? Well, that's going to be the skin. What structures form a protective ring around the entrance to the throat? That's the tonsils, tonsils. And what is the term that refers to a cancer-causing cell? That's a malignant cell, malignant. What is the term for a harmful or poisonous substance? That's a toxin, toxin. What is the word part for a lymph vessel? That's lymphangio, lympphangio. What role does the spleen play in the immune system? Well, it contains or houses lymphocytes, and it also is involved in B cell activation. Where are lymphocytes first created? Well, they're created in the bone marrow. What structures filter and destroy pathogens in lymph? Those are the lymph nodes. And which structure is responsible for differentiating lymphocytes into T cells? That's the thymus, Thymus. Okay, well, now we're going to talk about how the immune system works. We're going to talk about the immune response. And I'm going to add some information that is not provided in the textbook. And I hope that this will make some of the information a little clearer, a little easier to learn. First of all, there are two types of immune responses: the innate response, INNATE, and the adaptive response, ADAPTIVE. The innate response is what we are born with. For example, inflammation is an innate response to injury or disease. The adaptive response develops over time as the body encounters various pathogens. It has the ability to remember previous attacks and quickly generate defenses against them. When we studied the blood, we learned that there are three major types of blood cells that are in the blood. There are the erythrocytes, the thrombocytes, and do you remember the third one? The third one is the leukocyte, Leukocytes, or more commonly known as the white blood cells. Well, the white blood cells, the leukocytes, play a major role in the immune response. And there's a variety of types of leukocytes that come into play. Now let's first go ahead and look at the innate response. That is the response that everyone is born with. A special type of leukocyte that can eat foreign substances such as dust, pollen, and pathogens is known as a phagocyte, Phagocyte. The process of eating is phagocytosis, Phagocytosis. And there are a variety of phagocytes circulating in the body as part of the innate immune response. The first type is the macrophage, Macrophage. A macrophage is a large phagocyte that can surround and kill invading cells. The next type of phagocyte we already talked about in Chapter 5, and that is the neutrophil, Neutrophils. The neutrophil is the most common white blood cell in the body, and the neutrophil is a phagocyte that can eat a variety of pathogens. The third type is the dendritic cell, Dendritic. The dendritic cell is also a phagocyte. It eats pathogens, but then it displays the leftover remnants on these long tentacles that stick out from the cell body. And it puts these remnants on display for the T cells. And when the T cells see those, they can wake up and realize that, hey, there's something new out there that's been invading the body. And finally, we have the basophils, Basophils, and the eosinophils, Eosinophils. And again, we saw those back when we looked at the white blood cells in Chapter 5. Now, a second component of the innate response is known as the complement, Complement. The complement is part of the innate response, and it is a type of protein that normally circulates in the blood not really doing very much. But then when it comes in contact with an antigen, the complement will mark the antigen for destruction by one of the phagocytes. Now we're going to look at the adaptive response. And this is the type of immune response that probably most people think of when they think of the immune system and what it does. An antigen, antigen, is any substance that the body regards as foreign. And a major part of the adaptive response is a special type of white blood cell known as the lymphocyte, lymphocytes. And the lymphocytes are originally formed in the bone marrow as stem cells. These immature lymphocytes then start circulating through the body where they undergo what's called differentiation. Differentiation means the stem cells will grow into a different type of thing. By differentiating, it gains different characteristics. And these lymphocytes can differentiate into two major types of cells. The first type is known as the B cell. The B cell is a type of lymphocyte that has the ability to recognize a specific antigen. When it's activated by the presence of this antigen, the B cell becomes what is known as a plasma B cell, and then it will secrete an antibody against the antigen. Now, what's an antibody? An antibody is a disease-fighting protein that's coded to destroy a particular antigen. Now, another term for the antibody is immunoglobulin, immunoglobulin. Immunoglobulin and antibody mean the same thing. It's a disease-fighting protein that is created by the B cells. Now, in addition to these plasma B cells that activate and make the antibodies which kill off the invaders, B cells can also become what's known as memory B cells. And what they do is they have the ability to remember an antigen that has been fought before. So the B cells with memory can immediately tell the body, hey, remember this guy? It's an invader, go get it. And so then the plasma B cells can respond very quickly because of this memory feature. The second type of lymphocyte is the T cell. The T cell is another type of lymphocyte that in this case has been exposed to thymosin, which is secreted by the thymus. The T cells can coordinate the immune defenses, and they can also kill infected cells on contact. Now, the T cells do a variety of things, particularly as far as creating chemicals, proteins that will help fight off an infection. For example, the T cells create interferon, which you may have heard of, interferon. Interferon is a protein that's produced by the T cells that will fight viruses. T cells also produce lymphokines, lymphokynes. Lymphokines are cells that direct other cells in the immune system. They tell them what to do. Okay, now I know there's a lot of terms here. There's a lot of information. I find that the book really tends to just throw all this stuff in together and really doesn't sort it out very well. I hope that if you try to separate it in the two major types of response, innate and adaptive, and then subdivide it from there, you'll have a lot easier time remembering it. And what we're going to do now is we're going to try to do some practice to see how much of this you have down. Here we go. What is the term for the disease-fighting protein that's created by an activated B cell? Well, that's the antibody, antibody. Antibodies are created by the B cells. What is the general term for any cell that destroys an antigen by eating it? Well, that's the phagocyte. Phagocyte. Which type of lymphocyte coordinates immune defenses and can kill infected cells on contact? Well, that's the T cells. What is the term for any substance that the body regards as foreign? That's an antigen. Antigen. Inflammation is an example of which type of immune response? Well, that's the innate response. Innate. Which type of cell eats an antigen, then displays the leftovers in order to activate T cells? That's the dendritic cells. Dendritic. What is the term for a protein that circulates in an inactive state, but when it encounters an antigen, it's going to mark it for destruction by the phagocytes? Well, that's the complement. Complement. What is the term for the type of leukocyte that is formed as a stem cell in the bone marrow, but then differentiates into other parts of the body? Well, that's the lymphocyte. Lymphocyte. And again, there are two types of lymphocytes. What are the two major types of lymphocytes? There's the B cell and the T cell. What is the term for a protein that's created by T cells that can fight viruses? That's interferon. Interferon. And finally, what is the term for a large phagocyte that surrounds and destroys invading cells? Well, that's the macrophage. Macrophage. Macro refers to big or large. So if we're talking about a large phagocyte, big enough to eat a cell, then that's going to be the macrophage. This ends this episode of the Medical Terminology Podcast.